kept asking him was, if you can pay attention so well when you're playing hockey, how come you can't pay attention when you're sitting in class? It makes it look like it's a problem with willpower.
스마트폰 때문에 선천적이든 후천적이든 ADHD 증상을 하나씩 가지고 살아가는 사람들이 많습니다. 지난 영상에서도 말씀드렸지만 ADHD는 집중을 못하는 게 문제가 아니라 내가 정말 좋아하고 호기심 있어 하는 것에만 집중력을 발휘할 수 있는 점이 문제입니다.
A lot of times parents will bring in kids for me to see and they say, no, the teacher says this kid can't pay attention for more than 5 minutes. We know that's not true. We have watched her play video games. And she can sit and play those video games for 3 hours at a time and not move. And the teacher said she's easily distracted. That's nonsense. When she's playing those games, she's locked on that screen like a laser, and the only way you're going to get her attention is to jump in her face or turn off the TV.
정확히는 내가 정말 좋아하고 호기심 있는 것이 없을 때 문제가 됩니다. 상사병에 걸리듯 무언가에 꽂혀야만 집중력을 발휘할 수 있게 되는 건데요. 너 농구하는 것처럼 공부 좀 해봐. 다 너 잘 되라고 그러는 거잖아. 이런 말을 들으면서 마치 의지가 약한 사람 취급받기 쉽죠. 만약 성공하거나 돈을 벌여야 하는 게 지금 상황에서 가장 중요하다면 재미나 관심이 없어도 그것을 해낼 수 있어야 되는데 ADHD는 그게 잘 안 되는 겁니다.
People who don't have ADHD, if they've got something they've got to do and they know they've got to do it and it's important, they can usually make themselves pay attention, even if it's pretty boring, just because they know they have to do it. People with ADD, it is incredibly difficult for them to be able to make themselves pay attention, unless the task is something that's really interesting to them, not because somebody told them it ought to be interesting, but just because it is interesting to them for whatever reasons. Or if they feel like they have a gun to their head and something very unpleasant is going to be happening very fast if they don't take care of this right here, right now. Under those two conditions, no problem. They can focus very well. The problem is this is not something that's under voluntary control. It makes it look like it's a problem with willpower.
ADHD의 증상들을 알아야 하는 중요한 이유 중 하나는 ADHD는 간단한 실험이나 테스트로 진단할 수 있는 부분이 아니기 때문입니다.
There is no imaging picture that you can take of their brain. There is no blood test. There is no computer test. There is no electroencephalogram. This is not something which is determined by any one single test. Learning about somebody enough to know if they have a diagnosis is a well-conducted interview of a mental health or medical professional who understands ADHD with the parents, with the child, also making use of information from school if they're in school and from other people who can tell us more about how this child is functioning in aspects of everyday life.
지난 영상에서 말씀드린 ADHD의 3가지 증상 외에 4가지 증상이 더 있습니다.
What you often hear about from people with ADHD is they'll say they have a lot of difficulty in regulating their sleep. Many complain that they have trouble getting to sleep. And what they'll tell you is, I often stay up a lot later than I really want to or should. If I try to go to bed before I'm really exhausted, I just can't shut my head off. I just keep thinking of stuff. And so I stay up late, reading, watching TV, surfing the net or whatever, until I'm just exhausted, then I fall asleep fine. But the problem then is I tend to sleep like a dead person. I have a hard time resurrecting myself in the morning. And if I don't have somebody around to help me get myself out of bed in the morning, I'm very likely to be late to whatever it is I'm supposed to do, or possibly sleep through the whole thing. I just keep hitting the snooze button or just turn the clock off altogether. During the day, if they have to sit still for very long, to listen or to read or do paperwork, the eyelids start getting kind of heavy. People with ADD, it's almost like they can't get started until it's becoming an emergency. Another thing that often persons with ADHD have trouble with is writing. I'm not talking about penmanship now. I'm talking about taking ideas and putting them into sentences and paragraphs. What people will say is often, I've got a lot of ideas for what I should write for this essay, but it just takes me half a forever to be able to get the sentences and paragraphs put together so they make sense. Many times they have difficulty managing their emotions. But I need to give you a few examples because it's not the same for everybody. Came in and he said, I was in the diner yesterday, late afternoon, having lunch. I'm in a pretty good mood sitting there eating my sandwich. The guy in the booth behind me gets his sandwich. He's chewing to it loud. He's going chomp, chomp, chomp. He said there was something about that noise was driving me nuts. And that's all I could think about was that noise. I'm sitting with my fist clenched, seriously thinking about getting up and smacking this guy in the mouth because he's chewing so obnoxiously loud. And we said that was strange because after a few minutes, he's still making the same noise, but then it didn't bother me anymore. He said, stuff like that happens to me a lot. The kind of thing that most people on a scale of frustration would say, it goes from 0 to 10 and say, that's a 0 or a 1, maybe a 2 at the most. For me, he said, it can be like a 7 or an 8 or a 9. He said, sometimes I make a big fuss about it. Other times I don't say anything, but I feel this surge of anger where I feel like punching somebody or breaking something.
그럼 어떻게 하면 내가 원하는 것 외에 꼭 해야 하는 것들에 어떤 상황에서든 집중을 할 수 있을까요? 답을 먼저 말씀드리자면 눈 깜빡임과 관련이 있습니다. 우리가 행복하고 마음이 편안하면 눈도 천천히 깜빡입니다. 시간이 빨리 가는 느낌이 드는 이유도 깜빡임과 관련이 있습니다. 우리도 모르게 상황에 따라 깜빡임의 속도가 바뀌는 건데요. 이는 도파민과 관련이 있습니다.
Typically, the more alert you are, the higher the frame rate. You're thin slicing your experience. You've probably had this happen if you're ever very stressed and you're waiting for something or somebody. It seems like it takes forever. You're analyzing time more finely. Conversely, if you are very relaxed and you have to think about all the things you have to do, it will seem like the world is going by very, very fast and that you are moving very slow. Time is going at the same rate, but your perception of time is what's changed. Your perception of time is also changed on a rapid basis, moment-to-moment basis, by how often you blink. Right after blinks, we reset our perception of time. Now, what's interesting is that the rate of blinking is controlled by dopamine. That blinking and dopamine are inextricably linked. They are working together to control your attention. When dopamine levels go up, people tend to overestimate how long something lasted.
그럼 눈 깜빡임만 잘 컨트롤하면 집중을 잘할 수 있지 않을까라는 가설이 만들어지는데요.
Fortunately, it's also one that you can control. Focus their visual attention on some object that was relatively close, like their hand, for a minute or so, which actually takes some effort if you try and do that. They were allowed to blink. However, it's known from other work that if people can consciously override the desire to blink, at least to the point where they feel like they have to or else their eyes would dry out, that actually can increase attention even further. And they had conditions where they would look at a point further across the room and even further across the room. It only took a few minutes each day to do this, 30 seconds in one condition or maybe a minute, and then at another station of looking a little bit further out and a little bit further out.
도파민 수치를 높여주는 약물이나 카페인이 함유된 식품들이 눈 깜빡임에 영향을 줍니다.
Drugs that increase dopamine, even coffee and tea and other forms of caffeine, they tend to make us blink less. And when we get tired, we tend to blink more. Now it should make perfect sense that these shutters on the front of your eyes, they aren't just there for winking and they aren't just there for cosmetic purposes. They are there to regulate the amount of information going into your nervous system, and they're there to regulate how long you are bringing information and how widely or specifically you are grabbing attention from the visual world is set by whether or not you're viewing things very specifically, like a crosshair or through a soda straw view like this, or whether or not you are in this panoramic sort of whole environment mode, this kind of fisheye lens or wide-angle lens mode.